The sun was shining brightly over the amusement park, casting golden rays on the colorful rides and bustling crowds. Families laughed as children ran around with balloons in hand, their faces painted like tigers and superheroes. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy filled the air, blending perfectly with the cheerful chaos of the day. It was one of those rare moments when life felt simple and joyful. Captain Marcus Johnson stood in line for a roller coaster, his wife Lisa by his side, and their two kids bouncing excitedly ahead of them. After spending a year overseas on deployment, Marcus had eagerly looked forward to this day, a chance to reconnect with his family and leave behind the weight of his responsibilities as an Army officer. For once, he wasn't thinking about missions or strategies. He was just another dad enjoying a weekend outing. As they waited patiently in line, Marcus noticed a group of teenagers nearby. They were laughing loudly, tossing a football back and forth, clearly having the time of their lives. Their carefree energy reminded him of his own youth. Days spent playing outside until the streetlights came on, free from worries. He smiled faintly, watching them tease each other and show off tricks with the ball. It was a reminder of how precious these moments were, especially after the hardships he'd faced during his service. But then something shifted. A security guard approached the teens, his expression stern. At first, it seemed like a routine check. Maybe the teens had gotten too rowdy, or perhaps someone complained about the noise. Marcus didn't pay much attention. After all, parks often had rules about disruptive behavior. But as the conversation continued, the tone grew sharper. The guard's voice rose above the hum of the crowd, cutting through the cheerful atmosphere like a knife. Curiosity got the better of Marcus, and he turned slightly to see what was happening. What he saw made his stomach tighten. The teenager being questioned was black, and so was the growing circle of onlookers who had gathered to watch. Some whispered nervously among themselves while others recorded the scene on their phones. Something about the situation felt off, though Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on it yet. Before long, another figure joined the commotion, a police officer named Daniel Hayes, who worked part-time as extra security for the park. Hayes strode toward the group with an air of authority that quickly turned aggressive. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid, and his eyes scanned the crowd with suspicion. Without hesitation, he began barking orders at everyone within earshot, including Marcus, who hadn't even spoken a word. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked calmly, stepping forward slightly. His voice carried no hostility, only concern, but instead of answering, Hayes narrowed his gaze and pointed directly at Marcus's chest. "You think you're special because you're wearing that uniform?" Hayes sneered, referring to Marcus's casual army t-shirt. Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the accusation. He glanced down at his shirt, which bore the insignia of his unit. To him, it was a symbol of pride, a reminder of the sacrifices he'd made to protect people like Hayes. But to Hayes, it seemed to mean something entirely different. The tension between them crackled like electricity, drawing stares from nearby families. And then, in a move that shocked everyone present, Hayes reached for his holster and pulled out his gun. In one swift motion, he aimed it squarely at Marcus. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Children froze mid-laugh, and parents instinctively shielded their kids. Lisa grabbed their son and daughter, pulling them close as tears welled up in her eyes. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus locked eyes with Hayes, trying to process what was happening. His mind raced. Was this real? Was he seriously being threatened with a firearm for doing absolutely nothing wrong? As a soldier, Marcus had faced danger countless times, but never like this. Never at the hands of someone who was supposed to protect citizens, not terrify them. Still, he forced himself to stay calm. Raising his hands slightly, he took a small step backward, hoping to de-escalate the situation. Other park staff members hurried over, their faces pale with alarm. "Officer Hayes, please lower your weapon," one of them pleaded. After what felt like an eternity, Hayes finally holstered his gun and stormed off, muttering under his breath. The crowd remained silent, stunned by what they had witnessed. Marcus stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but this incident would change his life forever and spark a movement far bigger than himself. Though shaken, Marcus decided not to press the issue further. Not right. Then anyway. His priority was getting his family home safely. As they walked away from the ride, leaving behind the laughter and excitement they had come for, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of injustice that lingered in the air. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a fight that would test his strength, courage, and resolve. The amusement park, once filled with laughter and joy, now felt like a completely different place. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he ushered his family toward the exit. His wife Lisa held their children tightly, her face pale with fear. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting Officer Hayes to reappear. "What just happened?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was still processing the surreal scene himself, how quickly things had spiraled out of control, how close they had come to disaster. For Marcus, it wasn't just about what happened. It was why it happened. Why had Hayes reacted so aggressively? Was it because Marcus was black, or was it something else entirely? These questions swirled in his mind as they made their way through the crowded pathways of the park. Every step felt heavier than the last. The bright colors of the ride seemed dull now, overshadowed by the dark cloud of tension that hung over them. When they finally reached their car, Marcus let out a deep breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His son, 8-year-old, Elijah, looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad, why did that man pull out his gun?" he asked innocently. Marcus hesitated, unsure how to explain such a complicated situation to his child. How could he put into words the ugly reality of racism without scaring him further? "He made a mistake," Marcus said finally, forcing a small smile. "But don't worry, we're safe now." It was a lie, though. They weren't safe. Not really. Not when someone sworn to protect them had acted like a threat instead. Marcus knew this incident wouldn't end here. Something inside him told him he couldn't just walk away and pretend it never happened. Later that evening, back at home, the weight of the day settled heavily on Marcus. Sitting on the couch, he replayed the events in his head again, and again. The sound of Hayes's angry voice echoed in his ears. The sight of the gun pointed directly at him haunted his thoughts. He clenched his fists, trying to shake off the anger bubbling inside him. "I didn't do anything wrong," he muttered under his breath. Lisa sat beside him, her expression soft but firm. "You didn't," she agreed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But maybe this is bigger than just us. Maybe other people need to know." Her words struck a chord. Marcus had always believed in standing up for what was right, even if it meant putting himself in uncomfortable situations. As a soldier, he'd risked his life to defend others. Now, as a civilian facing injustice, he felt the same responsibility, to speak out, to demand accountability. But where should he start? The next morning, Marcus decided to take action. He called the amusement park's management office explaining what had happened and asking if they had any surveillance footage of the incident. To his relief, they confirmed that cameras were installed throughout the park and promised to review the tapes. Meanwhile, Marcus filed a formal complaint with the local police department, detailing every moment of the encounter. He described Hayes's aggressive behavior, the unwarranted accusations, and the terrifying act of pulling a weapon on an innocent person. Filing the complaint wasn't easy. Each word felt heavy, each sentence a reminder of the humiliation he'd endured. But Marcus refused to let fear or doubt stop him. He attached photos of his Army credentials to the report, emphasizing his role as a decorated officer who had served his country honorably. If anyone doubted his character, these documents would speak for themselves. As news of the incident spread, Marcus began reaching out to witnesses. Many of the people who had been present during the confrontation were eager to help. Some shared videos they had recorded on their phones, capturing Hayes's hostile demeanor and the shock of the crowd. Others offered written statements recounting exactly what they had seen. One woman, a teacher named Sarah, approached Marcus personally. "I've seen racism before, but this was something else," she said, her voice trembling. You deserve justice. Marcus appreciated the support, but not everyone was on his side. Online forums and comment sections buzzed with debate. While some praised his courage, others dismissed his claims, accusing him of exaggerating the situation or seeking attention. Anonymous trolls flooded his social media accounts with hateful messages, questioning his integrity and mocking his decision to file a complaint. At times, the negativity felt suffocating. Despite the backlash, Marcus remained determined. He attended community meetings, speaking openly about his experience and urging others to hold law enforcement accountable. His story resonated deeply with many attendees, particularly those from marginalized communities who had faced similar discrimination. Together, they formed a coalition aimed at addressing systemic issues within policing. Meanwhile, Officer Hayes dug his heels in, refusing to admit fault. During preliminary interviews with internal affairs investigators, he defended his actions, claiming he had acted in the interest of public safety. According to Hayes, Marcus's presence near the group of teenagers had raised red flags. He insisted he had followed protocol and only drawn his weapon as a precautionary measure. However, video evidence painted a very different picture. Footage from the amusement park clearly showed Marcus standing calmly, posing no threat whatsoever. There was no sign of aggression, no indication of resistance. In fact, Marcus had done everything possible to de-escalate the situation, raising his hands and stepping back when confronted. The contrast between Hayes' account and the actual events was stark and damning. As the investigation progressed, more troubling details about Hayes emerged. Records revealed a history of complaints against him, including allegations of racial profiling and excessive force. Most of these cases had been dismissed due to lack of evidence or perhaps willful neglect. For Marcus, this discovery was infuriating but unsurprising. It confirmed what he already suspected. Hayes' actions weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a much larger problem. While waiting for updates from the police department, Marcus found solace in his family. Lisa reminded him daily of why he was fighting, not just for himself but for their children. Elijah and Maya deserve to grow up in a world where they don't have to be afraid of people like Hayes, she said one evening. Her words strengthened his resolve. He wanted to create a future where his kids could live freely, without constantly worrying about being judged based on the color of their skin. At the same time, Marcus struggled with feelings of vulnerability. As a soldier, he was trained to handle danger and uncertainty. But this was different. This was personal. This was about protecting not just his family, but his dignity. Every night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he wondered whether justice would truly prevail, or if he was fighting a losing battle. Still, Marcus refused to give up. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew silence wasn't an option. By speaking out, he hoped to inspire others to do the same. And though he couldn't predict the outcome, he held on to one undeniable truth. Change started with courage, and he had plenty of that. The days following the incident were a whirlwind for Marcus. Every morning he woke up with a sense of purpose, but also a deep unease. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on him, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He knew he had to keep pushing forward, not just for himself, but for others who might find themselves in similar situations. This wasn't just about one racist cop. It was about exposing a system that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Marcus spent hours preparing his case, gathering evidence, and reaching out to anyone who could help. He reached out to civil rights organizations, local activists, and even lawyers specializing in police misconduct cases. Each conversation gave him more clarity and more determination. One lawyer, Ms. Rachel Carter, stood out in particular. She listened intently as Marcus recounted the events at the amusement park, nodding thoughtfully when he described Hayes' actions. "This is textbook racial profiling," she said firmly, "and we're going to make sure people hear your story." With Rachel's guidance, Marcus began drafting a detailed timeline of the incident. He included timestamps, witness statements, and screenshots of online harassment he'd received since speaking out. It was exhausting work, but Marcus refused to cut corners. If he wanted justice, He needed every piece of evidence lined up perfectly. He also requested copies of the amusement park's surveillance footage, which clearly showed Hayes drawing his weapon without provocation. Watching the video again made Marcus's blood boil, but he reminded himself why he was doing this, to ensure no one else had to endure what he did. As word of the incident spread, public interest grew rapidly. A local news station picked up the story after receiving tips from eyewitnesses. Reporters interviewed Marcus, Lisa, and several park visitors who had witnessed the confrontation. The segment aired during prime time, capturing the attention of thousands across the city. Viewers were outraged. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Dying Justice for Marcus" and "Dire Accountability Now," amplifying the call for action. Protesters gathered outside the police department headquarters, holding signs that read "Protect and Serve All" and "No More Racist Cops." For Marcus, seeing the community rally behind him was both humbling and empowering. But not everyone supported him. Online trolls continued their attacks, accusing Marcus of exaggerating the incident or seeking fame. Some even suggested he deserved what happened because of his race. These comments stung, but Marcus refused to let them derail him. Instead, he focused on the positive responses, the messages of encouragement from strangers, the offers of support from advocacy groups, and the growing number of people attending rallies in his name. Lisa often reminded him to stay grounded. "They're trying to distract you," she told him one evening. "Don't let them win." While the public outcry gained momentum, the police department launched its internal investigation into Officer Hayes' conduct. Investigators reviewed the surveillance footage, interviewed witnesses, and examined past complaints against Hayes. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Over the years, Hayes had been accused multiple times of using excessive force and targeting minorities. In one instance, he had allegedly tackled a teenage boy during a routine traffic stop, leaving the boy with a broken arm. Another complaint involved Hayes shouting racial slurs at a driver during a DUI checkpoint. None of these allegations had resulted in disciplinary action, until now. For Marcus, learning about Hayes' history was both validating and infuriating. It confirmed his suspicions that Hayes' behavior wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Still, he couldn't help but feel frustrated by how long it had taken for accountability to catch up. How many people suffered before me? He wondered aloud one night. Lisa didn't have an answer, but she held his hand tightly, offering silent reassurance. During this time, Marcus became increasingly vocal about systemic racism within law enforcement. He attended town hall meetings, spoke at rallies, and participated in panel discussions about policing reform. At first, he felt nervous addressing large crowds, but as he shared his story, he grew more confident. People listened, not just because of what had happened to him, but because of how he carried himself with dignity and grace. His military background added credibility to his message, making it harder for critics to dismiss him. One particularly memorable event took place at a community center packed with concerned citizens. Marcus stood at the podium, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "I served my country to protect people like you," he began. "But when I came home, I found myself facing hostility, not from enemies abroad, but from someone who swore to protect me. That's not right. We deserve better." The room erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a surge of hope. Change might take time, but moments like this proved it was possible. Behind the scenes, however, the fight was far from easy. Marcus faced constant pressure, from investigators asking him to recount traumatic details, from reporters hounding him for updates, and from skeptics questioning his motives. There were days when he questioned whether it was all worth it. Could one person really make a difference? But then he'd think about Elijah and Maya, his children, and the kind of world he wanted them to grow up in. If he stayed silent, nothing would change. And so, he kept going. Lisa played a crucial role in keeping Marcus grounded. She handled logistics, coordinated interviews, and shielded their kids from the worst of the negativity. When Marcus felt overwhelmed, she reminded him of the bigger picture. "You're doing this for more than just yourself," she said one evening. "You're fighting for everyone who doesn't have a voice." By the end of the month, the investigation had reached a critical stage. Internal affairs investigators concluded that Hayes had violated department policies regarding the use of force and had engaged in discriminatory behavior. They recommended termination, pending final approval from higher-ups. Meanwhile, prosecutors reviewed the case to determine whether criminal charges should be filed. For Marcus, this was a small victory, but only the first step toward true accountability. As he reflected on everything that had transpired, Marcus realized how much he had grown. Just weeks ago, he had been an ordinary dad enjoying a day at the park. Now he was a symbol of resilience, standing up against injustice despite the odds. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With his family by his side and a community rallying behind him, he was ready to face whatever came next. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they were turning. After weeks of intense scrutiny, the Internal Affairs Division of the Police Department released its preliminary findings. Officer Daniel Hayes had violated multiple protocols during the amusement park incident, including improper use of force and failure to de-escalate a non-threatening situation. The report also highlighted a disturbing pattern of behavior, racial profiling, aggressive tactics, and a blatant disregard for accountability. For Marcus, reading the findings brought a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the truth was finally coming to light, and frustration that it had taken so long. But the investigation wasn't over yet. Prosecutors reviewed the case to determine whether criminal charges should be filed against Hayes. This phase was particularly challenging for Marcus. He was called in repeatedly for interviews, each session forcing him to relive the humiliation and fear he had felt that day at the park. Investigators asked him to describe every detail: the tone of Hayes's voice, the angle of the gun, the reactions of the crowd. At times, Marcus wondered if revisiting the trauma was worth it. But then he thought about all the people counting on him, the families who wanted safer communities, the children who deserved to grow up free from fear. And he pushed through. Hayes, meanwhile, became increasingly defensive as the pressure mounted. During his own interviews with investigators, he doubled down on his initial claims, insisting that Marcus had posed a potential threat. He argued that his actions were justified given the circumstances, even though video evidence directly contradicted him. When confronted with past complaints against him, Hayes dismissed them as misunderstandings or exaggerations. "I was just doing my job," he said repeatedly, his tone laced with defiance. To Marcus, Hayes's refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing only reinforced the need for systemic change. It wasn't just about one bad apple. It was about addressing the rot in the barrel itself. He began attending more meetings with advocacy groups, sharing his story and advocating for reforms like mandatory bias training, stricter oversight of police conduct, and independent review boards to investigate misconduct allegations. These discussions gave him hope, but they also highlighted how deeply entrenched the problem was. Racism in law enforcement wasn't an isolated issue. It was a symptom of broader societal issues that needed to be tackled head-on. As the investigation dragged on, public interest remained high. Protesters continued to gather outside the police station, their numbers growing with each passing week. Community leaders organized marches, vigils, and educational workshops aimed at raising awareness about racial injustice. Marcus attended many of these events, often speaking alongside other victims of police brutality. One woman, a single mother, named Angela, shared her story of losing her teenage son to a wrongful shooting by officers responding to a noise complaint. Her pain resonated deeply with Marcus, reminding him why this fight mattered so much. At one rally, Marcus took the stage to address the crowd. His voice was steady, but his words carried raw emotion. "This isn't just about me," he said, looking out at the sea of faces. "It's about every person who has been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. It's about every parent who worries their child won't come home safe. We can't let fear silence us. We have to keep pushing for change." The crowd erupted in cheers, holding up signs and chanting slogans like, "No justice, no peace," and "Hold them accountable." For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel proud. He had started this journey alone, but now he stood surrounded by allies, people who believed in the same vision of fairness and equality. It was a powerful reminder that collective action could move mountains. Behind the scenes, legal battles raged on. Hayes's defense team argued that the gun-drawing incident was a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a deliberate act of racism. They tried to shift focus away from Hayes's history of misconduct, claiming those incidents were unrelated to the current case. Prosecutors countered by presenting overwhelming evidence, including surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and expert analysis showing clear patterns of discriminatory behavior. Ms. Rachel Carter, Marcus's lawyer, played a pivotal role in building the case. She worked tirelessly to ensure every piece of evidence was presented clearly and convincingly. For Marcus, watching the legal proceedings unfold was both empowering and infuriating. On one hand, he was grateful for the support of skilled professionals, fighting on his behalf. On the other hand, he couldn't help but feel frustrated by the slow pace of the system. Every delay felt like another victory for those resisting accountability. Still, he reminded himself that justice required patience, a lesson he had learned during his years in the military. Amidst the chaos, Marcus found moments of peace with his family. Lisa made sure they spent quality time together, shielding their children from the worst of the media frenzy. They went on hikes, cooked meals together, and watched movies late into the night. These small joys helped Marcus recharge, giving him the strength to face the challenges ahead. Elijah and Maya, though young, understood enough to know their father was doing something important. "Are you going to stop the bad guys, Dad?" Maya asked one evening, her big brown eyes filled with admiration. Marcus smiled softly. "I'm trying, sweetheart. I'm trying." Lisa, too, played a crucial role in keeping Marcus grounded. She handled logistics, coordinated interviews, and shielded their kids from negativity. When Marcus felt overwhelmed, she reminded him of the bigger picture. "You're not just fighting for yourself," she said one night. "You're fighting for everyone who doesn't have a voice." By the end of the month, the case reached a critical juncture. Prosecutors announced they would file misdemeanor assault charges against Hayes, citing the unwarranted use of a firearm against an unarmed civilian. While some celebrated the decision as a step forward, others argued it wasn't enough. Criminal charges were a start, but real change required addressing the root causes of systemic racism within law enforcement. Marcus knew this better than anyone. He decided to channel his energy into advocacy work, partnering with organizations focused on policing reform. Together, they launched initiatives to promote transparency, accountability, and community engagement. Marcus traveled to schools, churches, and town halls, sharing his story and urging others to get involved. "Change starts with us," he told audiences. "If we don't speak up, nothing will ever improve." Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced fear, anger, and doubt, but he hadn't backed down. And as he looked around at the growing movement inspired by his courage, he realized he wasn't alone. Thousands of voices had joined his, demanding a better future for everyone. Justice might take time, but with persistence and unity, anything was possible. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial against Officer Daniel Hayes began. Reporters filled the rows, their cameras clicking incessantly. Community members packed the benches, some clutching signs that read, "Justice for Marcus," and "No more racist cops." The atmosphere was tense, charged with emotion. For Marcus, walking into the room felt surreal. He had spent months reliving the trauma of that day at the amusement park. But now, finally, he would have his chance to tell his story in front of a judge and jury. As the proceedings got underway, the prosecution presented its case methodically. They started with the surveillance footage from the park, playing it on a large screen for everyone to see. The video showed Marcus standing calmly, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace, while Hayes aggressively approached him and drew his weapon. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the footage played. Even those who had seen it before were struck by how clearly it demonstrated Hayes's misconduct. There was no mistaking what had happened, no justification for pointing a gun at an innocent man. Next, witnesses took the stand. Park visitors who had been present during the incident recounted their experiences, describing Hayes's hostile demeanor and the shock they felt when he pulled out his firearm. One woman, a mother of 3, tearfully testified about how she had shielded her children from the scene, terrified that someone might get hurt. Another witness, a teenager who had been part of the group initially questioned by security, spoke about feeling targeted because of his race. Each account added weight to the prosecution's argument that Hayes's actions were not only unjustified, but rooted in prejudice. When it was Marcus's turn to testify, the room fell silent. Dressed in his army uniform, a deliberate choice to emphasize his role as a protector of justice, he walked to the stand with quiet confidence. His voice was steady as he recounted the events of that day, describing how Hayes had singled him out, accused him without cause, and escalated the situation unnecessarily. He explained how the experience had shaken him, not just as a father or husband, but as a soldier who believed in fairness and equality. "I serve my country to defend people like Officer Hayes," Marcus said, his tone firm yet measured. "But when I came home, I found myself facing hostility, not from enemies abroad, but from someone who swore to protect me. That's not right." His words resonated deeply with the jurors, many of whom nodded sympathetically. Even the judge seemed moved, occasionally jotting notes as Marcus spoke. When cross-examination began, Hayes's defense team tried to poke holes in Marcus's testimony, suggesting he had provoked Hayes somehow or misunderstood the situation. But Marcus remained composed, answering each question with clarity and conviction. By the time he stepped down from the stand, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. He was telling the truth. Hayes's defense, meanwhile, struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence against him. His lawyers argued that he had acted out of concern for public safety, claiming he had perceived Marcus as a potential threat due to his proximity to the group of teenagers. They pointed to past incidents where officers had used force under similar circumstances, attempting to frame Hayes's actions as standard protocol. However, the prosecution dismantled these arguments piece by piece, showing how Hayes's behavior deviated significantly from accepted practices. Expert witnesses called by the state highlighted the lack of any real threat posed by Marcus and emphasized the disproportionate nature of Hayes's response. Perhaps most damning was the revelation of Hayes's disciplinary record. Prosecutors introduced documents detailing previous complaints against him, including allegations of racial profiling and excessive force. Many of these cases had gone unpunished, allowing Hayes to continue his pattern of misconduct unchecked. This history painted a clear picture of negligence within the police department, a system that had enabled bad actors rather than holding them accountable. For Marcus, this aspect of the trial was particularly painful. It underscored how widespread the problem was and reinforced his commitment to advocating for systemic change. After days of testimony, closing arguments, and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. As the 4 persons stood to deliver the decision, the courtroom held its breath. "Guilty," she announced, her voice ringing out across the room. Cheers erupted from the crowd, followed by applause and tears of relief. Marcus sat still, his expression unreadable. Inside, however, a storm of emotions swirled. Relief, vindication, sadness, and anger all rolled into one. Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with pride. The judge sentenced Hayes to probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent ban from working in law enforcement. While some viewed the punishment as lenient, others saw it as a significant step forward. Hayes wouldn't be able to terrorize anyone else with his badge and gun ever again. For Marcus, the outcome wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For now. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered to celebrate the verdict. Protest signs waved in the air as chants of "Justice is served" echoed through the streets. Marcus addressed the crowd briefly, thanking them for their unwavering support. "This victory belongs to all of us," he said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "We stood together, and we made our voices heard. But let's not stop here. Real change requires more than convictions, it requires action." Let's keep pushing for reforms that will make our communities safer and fairer for everyone. His speech inspired renewed determination among activists and allies. Organizations launched campaigns focused on implementing stricter oversight of law enforcement, increasing transparency, and addressing implicit bias. Marcus became a key figure in these efforts, using his platform to amplify marginalized voices and push for meaningful policy changes. He traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, meeting with lawmakers, and collaborating with grassroots movements. Everywhere he went, people listened, not just because of what he had endured, but because of how he carried himself with dignity and purpose. Back home, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a traumatic experience. Marcus cherished quiet moments with his family, savoring the laughter of his children and the warmth of Lisa's embrace. Yet, even in those peaceful times, he couldn't forget the bigger picture. He knew the fight against racism and injustice was far from over. Every day, new stories emerged of Black individuals being targeted, harassed, or killed by those sworn to protect them. Each headline reminded Marcus of why he had spoken up in the first place. One evening, as he tucked Elijah and Maya into bed, Marcus paused to reflect on everything that had transpired. "Daddy, are you a hero?" Maya asked sleepily, her tiny hand gripping his finger. Marcus chuckled softly. "Not really," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm just someone who decided to stand up for what's right. And you can do that too, sweetheart. Anyone can." Her eyelids fluttered shut, and Marcus lingered for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall with each gentle breath. In her innocence, he saw hope, a future where fear didn't dictate lives, where fairness triumphed over prejudice. It was a vision worth fighting for, no matter how long it took. Though justice had been served in this particular case, Marcus understood that true progress required sustained effort. Racism wasn't something that could be eradicated overnight. It was a deeply ingrained issue that demanded constant vigilance. But every step forward mattered. Every voice raised, every policy changed, every heart opened. It all contributed to a better tomorrow. As Marcus looked ahead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced hatred and come out stronger on the other side. Now, armed with courage and conviction, he was ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. Justice might take time, but with persistence and unity, anything was possible. Months had passed since the trial, and life for Marcus began to settle into a new rhythm. The amusement park incident was no longer a daily headline, but its impact lingered in both his personal life and the broader community. For Marcus, the journey hadn't ended with Hayes' conviction. It had only deepened his resolve to create lasting change. He knew that while one battle had been won, the war against systemic racism and injustice was far from over. One sunny Saturday morning, Marcus returned to the amusement park with his family. It was a deliberate choice, a way to reclaim the space where everything had happened. As they walked through the colorful pathways, Elijah and Maya ran ahead, laughing as they pointed at rides and games. Lisa held Marcus's hand tightly, her smile warm yet cautious. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Marcus took a deep breath, looking around at the cheerful chaos of families enjoying their day. "Better," he said honestly. "It feels lighter here now." The park staff greeted them warmly, apologizing once again for what had occurred and thanking Marcus for bringing attention to the issue. They assured him that new security measures were in place, including mandatory bias training for all employees. While Marcus appreciated the gesture, he knew policies alone weren't enough. Real change required consistent effort and accountability. Still, seeing the park bustling with joy restored some of the hope he'd lost along the way. In the weeks following the trial, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work with renewed energy. He partnered with civil rights organizations to push for statewide reforms in policing practices. Together, they drafted proposals for independent oversight boards, stricter guidelines on the use of force, and transparent reporting systems for misconduct complaints. Lawmakers listened closely, many citing Marcus's case as proof of the urgent need for reform. His story humanized the statistics, making it impossible to ignore the consequences of unchecked racism within law enforcement. Marcus also collaborated with educators to develop workshops aimed at teaching young people about racial justice and civic responsibility. These programs focus not just on raising awareness, but empowering students to become active participants in creating equitable communities. At one high school assembly, a teenage girl approached Marcus afterward, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for standing up," she said. "I've been scared to speak out, but hearing your story makes me feel like I can too." Her words reminded Marcus why he kept going, even when the weight of the fight felt overwhelming. Hayes' sentencing sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Many departments reviewed their own protocols, implementing changes to prevent similar incidents. Some officers expressed frustration, arguing that increased scrutiny made their jobs harder. Others welcomed the shift, acknowledging that accountability was long overdue. For Marcus, these mixed reactions highlighted the complexity of the issue. Change wouldn't come easily, especially in institutions resistant to it. But every small step forward mattered. Community leaders continued organizing marches and rallies, keeping the momentum alive. Protesters carried signs bearing Marcus's name alongside others who had fallen victim to police brutality. Their chants echoed through city streets, demanding justice not just for individuals, but for entire communities. Marcus attended many of these events, often sharing the stage with families who had lost loved ones to racist violence. Each story broke his heart anew, but also strengthened his determination to keep fighting. At home, Marcus worked hard to shield his children from the harsh realities of the world, while still preparing them for it. Conversations about race and fairness became a regular part of their lives. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Elijah asked, "Dad, will people always treat us differently because we're black?" The question caught Marcus off guard, but he answered, "Honestly, some might," he admitted, "but that doesn't mean we let them define us. We stand tall, we speak up, and we show them our worth. And we stick together, always." Maya chimed in, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "I'm brave like you, Daddy," she declared proudly. Marcus chuckled, pulling her onto his lap. "Yes, you are," he said, kissing the top of her head. "And so is your brother. You both have the power to make the world better." Lisa smiled, watching the tender moment unfold. She had always known Marcus was extraordinary, but seeing him rise above adversity with such grace and resilience filled her with immense pride. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew they could face anything together. As months turned into years, Marcus's influence grew beyond local boundaries. His story inspired documentaries, books, and even a feature film, all highlighting the importance of standing up against injustice. He traveled extensively, speaking at universities, conferences, and international forums. Everywhere he went, people thanked him for giving voice to their struggles and showing that change was possible. Despite the recognition, Marcus remained humble. He never sought fame or accolades. His mission was rooted in service. Whether addressing crowds of thousands or mentoring a single teenager, he approached each interaction with sincerity and compassion. "This isn't about me," he often said. "It's about building a future where everyone feels safe, valued, and free." Back in his hometown, tangible progress began to take shape. New laws were enacted to hold police officers accountable for misconduct. Community policing initiatives fostered trust between residents and law enforcement. Schools implemented diversity curriculums, teaching students about the history of racism and the importance of allyship. Marcus played a key role in many of these efforts, serving as a bridge between marginalized communities and those in positions of power. Yet, he never forgot the sacrifices made along the way. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Marcus sometimes found himself scrolling through old messages from supporters and detractors alike. The hateful comments still stung, but they also reminded him of the stakes. Progress came at a cost, and he owed it to those who had fought before him and those who would follow to keep pushing forward. On the anniversary of the amusement park incident, Marcus gathered his family for a special outing. They visited a memorial dedicated to victims of police brutality, where Marcus placed flowers alongside photos of those who had lost their lives. Standing there, surrounded by reminders of pain and resilience, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. He thought about how far they had come, not just his family, but the entire movement for justice. "Let's go ride the roller coaster," he suggested, turning to his kids with a grin. Elijah and Maya cheered, racing toward the entrance. As the ride soared into the sky, Marcus looked out at the horizon, feeling a surge of hope. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every challenge faced, every voice raised, every heart changed. It all contributed to a brighter tomorrow. For Marcus, the fight would never truly end. But as long as he had love, courage, and unity on his side, he knew anything was possible. Justice might take time, but with persistence and faith, the world could and would become a better place.